Ex-Inmates of Reddit, what was the stupidest thing you've seen a new inmate do on his first day in prison? Worked as a corrections officer, guy got busted for sexual assault of a minor, figured everyone else in the tank was on similar charges, so began talking openly about it, feeling he was safe. We had to subdue 5 guys who jumped him in the rec yard. Guy was sent to the hospital as he was fairly unresponsive. He was sent to protective custody after that. A lot of people in jail have history of being sexually abused. It makes it personal for them. Survivors are more likely to experience a host of mental health problems, including drug abuse, delinquency, crime, depression, suicidal thoughts, actions, and many more. In regards to the topic, adult survivors are more than twice as likely to be arrested for a property offense than their non-abused peers, 9.3% versus 4.4%. As adults, child sexual abuse victims were almost twice as likely to be arrested for a violent offense as the general population, 20.4% versus 10.7%. Males who have been sexually abused are more likely to violently victimize others. Add in the fact that men were most commonly molested at age 4, may not even remember, or have repressed the memory, and you have a recipe for individuals who feel fucked up and angry all the time for no reason, and not know why. If I'm reading the statistics right, an estimated 2/3 of those in prison for violent offenses were victims of sexual abuse in their lifetime. Many won't remember or admit to themselves or others that it was the case. This idiot walked right into a Mexican gang meeting and almost got beaten up. I was in jail, not prison. My mistake. Again, I'm idiot. Since many people are asking. From what I understand, the difference between prison and jail is this. Jail is for sentences of less than a year, whereas prison is for sentences of over a year, varying from state to state. Jails is run by the city or county, prisons ran by state or federal government. You can go to jail to await your trial before sentencing, then after be sent back to jail, or to prison depending on how long, and whether it's a felony or not. Prison is for felonies. Kid gets booked in, hits the unit and starts borrowing food and other commissary items. Before he knew it, he was $200 in the hole. Problem is, in jail and prison, most people who are willing to loan items out expect 2 or 3 of the same items back. You knows, interest. Very easy way to get yourself indebted is by borrowing any food or other items. Never get in debt while incarcerated. Not me but my dad. Guy came in bragging about what he did. Said he was a monster and the toughest guy around, and that he could take anybody on in the pen. Giving him the benefit of the doubt, he apparently was a big and tough guy. Come to find out though, he was in for the assault, rape, then murder of a woman and her child. He might have been big and tough, but not after 5 big guys beat the absolute shit out of him, and practically killed him. As most of you know, the one thing all prisoners can agree on is that anyone who messes with kids or women are on an immediate hit list. The woman thing might have just been a rule amongst him, and the people he ran with. Not me but my dad. Guy came in bragging about what he did. Said he was a monster and the toughest guy around, and that he could take anybody on in the pen. Giving him the benefit of the doubt, he apparently was a big and tough guy. Come to find out though, he was in for the assault, rape, then murder of a woman and her child. He might have been big and tough, but not after 5 big guys beat the absolute shit out of him, and practically killed him. As most of you know, the one thing all prisoners can agree on is that anyone who messes with kids or women are on an immediate hit list. The woman thing might have just been a rule amongst him, and the people he ran with. So, my dad's currently convicted, and the craziest story he's told me is one of the newer inmates was young and arrogant. Always spouting off bullshit about how unaccountable he was. Then one day, another inmate packed up his items, went into the younger inmate's cell and tried to strangle him. The younger inmate was that fucking annoying. He survived. The attempted murderer is in max, and when the younger inmate came back from the hospital, he was still spouting bullshit. There was an old myth that if you challenged the meanest guy in your block to a fight, everyone else would leave you alone. It's true, no one will torment you if you are dead. Kid tried it and got dropped off the 5th tier. First day in Gen Pop, last day in Gen Pop. Most guys just want to do their time alone. Most rape and violence in prison is about debt or tax. If you play it straight, 98% of guys will just leave you alone. Fucking someone up on the yard makes your time worse, not better. Loss of privilege, of time in solitary, most people don't want that. Most of the straight up psychopaths are in 23-1 lockdown anyway. You get in debt or shoot your mouth off, and you will get settled or taxed, both are to be avoided. This may not have been his first day, but I will never forget this. This while I was in the intake tank, which is the first anchor section you go into after being processed in county. This young kid comes into county and keeps complaining that he doesn't get his cannabinol and other marijuana-related prescriptions in jail. He was really arrogant and constant pissing everyone off. During count one day as we were all in our bunks, he starts complaining again, and then says to the guard, "What if we all riot immediately like 10 other guys yell very loudly we don't know or agree with him?" The guard then says, "What the fuck did you say?" The kid then continues about rioting and that he has rights. Everyone in the tank fucking stays like frozen in their bunk, trying their best to be non-threatening and also show they have no interest in what this moron is saying. So, the guard picks him up by his throat and slams him into the wall. After scaring the kid shitless, he explains he has a new charge for inciting a riot. Kid gets hauled off to solitary. Never saw him again, but I heard he spent the rest of his 30 to 60 to 90 whatever amount days in solitary. Absolutely insane to me that he'd say that in a fucking county jail. Just going to generalize. Small town folk who are used to being the biggest and saddest. Big fish small pond types who think they are going to be king when they walk in. They usually are dominated pretty quickly. Dominated being either beat or made into a bitch. Best bet if you go to prison, hopefully no one ever goes, is unless you know someone well connected on the inside. Just keep your head down, focus on yourself, and do your time. It's going to be boring, menial, and seemingly endless, but you don't want to get caught up in any gang stuff or be snitching. There's a code and system in prison that needs to be followed, and if you walk in like king shit of Turd Hill, when you are nobody you will learn really quick that you are nothing. I found a hypodermic needle in my thin mattress and tried to go give it to the guard. I was bum rushed by an inmate, as it probably was, and told that if I had given it to the guard, I would have faced a P test in solitary. This was day 1. On day 3 I asked to trade laundry detergent for a back rub, and only after I did so I realized that everyone thought I was gay. I was a very dumb 18-year-old white girl. I did 14 years in federal prison for wire fraud. I got out last February. I'm 36. Some things I can say are these. While your sexuality may not be an issue outside of prison, inside prison, male inmates who are openly gay are generally disrespected. Gambling and drugs create debts that are at some point unable to be paid, and can result in serious issues for yourself. Most prisons operate a social hierarchy based on gang affiliations or hometowns, although there can be large separations based on race. However, rapists and child molesters will basically be free game for anyone who wants to take their shit or torment them. You might have been a badass outside of prison, but generally you can't fight several people at once, which is what would happen if you talk about how much of a badass you are. Keep your shit to yourself, and don't talk crazy to people, which is seen as disrespect. Disrespect has a different meaning in prison, and you'll figure it out. Best to just keep to yourself, unless as much as possible, unless you want to embrace prison life and become institutionalized. Prison is not a place to make friends. I came in, got on the top bunk, within 10 minutes dude rolled off it, and smacked his head on the concrete. Started to have a seizure, guards eventually came, and just videotaped him for a while in the middle of the room. Eventually they walked him out when he stopped, but then he ran into the wall, and fell down, then started to seizure again. They just kept filming. Nobody really thought he was having seizures, but he hit his head pretty bad, so they took him to the infirmary. I got bunk restriction while I was in jail on one of my first night. Twice a day they did roll call where we all had to sit on our bunk, be quiet while the officer came bunk to bunk, and checked all of our wristbands, and made sure we were all who we are. Halfway through he was doing this, someone rips the loudest, fattest, longest wet fart I've ever heard in my life. Me having the mind of a 5-year-old burst into laughter. I've never heard a fart like this in my life. A few other guys laugh, but even thinking of it, no, I giggle about it. Anyways, the officer is like, "All right, settle down," but I can't stop laughing about it. He tells me to calm down, But I tell him through my tears of laughter I literally cannot help it. I really couldn't. It was the funniest thing that happened the few days I was in there. Anyway, he gets pissed. I try to explain I'm not trying to be rude and disobey him through my laughter, but he isn't having it. Luckily, he just gave me bunk restriction and didn't punish everyone, but I could see the TV from my bunk, so I just hung out the rest of the night. I couldn't stop laughing at the biggest fart I ever heard in my life and got grounded to my bunk for a night. Obligatory. Wow, my top comment is about farts. Me could be worse. Spent a year in a Bangkok prison. Saw lots of shit go down, but the one story I have that's relevant to your question has to be this English guy that turned up one day. It was actually the first and only other British guy I would encounter. While I was there, in the moment he came through the gates, I was called over to try and communicate and translate for him. He was refusing to talk to anyone, basically going on a silent strike, because he thought he wasn't supposed to be there, and they were denying his human rights and all that shit. First thing that happens when you enter the prison is they shave your head. This kid had massive dreadlocks and didn't want anyone touching them, but at this point he had already made his bed, and he was going to have to sleep in it. I went over to him and introduced myself, asked him what his name was, where he was from, etc., but he just stared at me in silence the whole time. One of the guards gave me a photocopy of his passport, so I could see his name, age and where he was from, etc. Against all odds this kid was actually from my hometown, so my face lit up. Finally I would have someone to talk to, and I'm sure we could chat shit and bond while we were in there. God, did I need that. But he just refused to engage with anyone, even me who was trying so hard to get a word out of him. I explained over and over that he'd lost the game, he's in prison now, and there is no way out of it, so just do what the guards say. They're going to shave your head first of all, and there's nothing you can do about it. Because no one had explained to me what exactly was going on, I was just confused why he wasn't talking to me. The more I spoke to him, and the more he refused to talk back, the more pissed off I got. I just couldn't understand why he was being so difficult, and by the end of our encounter I was fucking shouting at him, telling him to stop being such a little bitch, and just accept your fate. I didn't know if he was retarded or genuinely couldn't speak, but it became clear that he was just putting on an act. Eventually I just told the guards there is fuck all I can do if he's not willing to speak, so go ahead and do what you've got to do. I said my goodbyes to him and told him he really needs to accept his fate. It will be easier on everyone, and when you're ready to talk I'll be here, because let me tell you, that's the best thing you could hope for in a place like this. He ended up being pinned down by the guards, and his dreads shave off while he was screaming and screaming. Of course, I felt bad, but come on, time to swallow your pride, mate. He was then admitted to the prison and he came to sit with me. He still refused to speak, so I got a notebook and pen, and we communicated via writing for a few days. The guards didn't know what to do with him, and all the prisoners just thought he was a mental case. I still wasn't sure myself. After a few days of gossip, another prisoner told me that the kid was faking it. When I asked how he knew, he told me that he was arrested at the same police station with him, and the whole time he was in custody this kid had been screaming bloody murder at the officers, claiming the violation of human rights and all that shit. Then one day when I was having a chat with him by means of writing, he started asking me about the embassy, and I told him about what services they offer and how they can help, etc. Then he wrote down on the paper, "Can I make a phone call through the embassy?" I just looked at him dead on and said, "What good is a phone call if you can't fuck talk?" I couldn't help but chuckle, and he knew the gig was up, at least with me it was. Not long after that, the kid was taken from the prison and carted off to a mental health institution so they could evaluate him. I didn't see him for a few weeks when he suddenly reappeared looking very disheveled and completely traumatized. And wouldn't you know it, he could suddenly speak. He started telling me about the horrors of the mental institution he had just experienced, and my god, it sounded fucking awful, even worse than the hellhole I was currently in, which is really saying something. We bonded for the month or so he was there, and we exchanged details. I have spoken to him since I've been out, and it turns out we have a fair number of mutual friends, which is one hell of a coincidence. Anyway, the point of this story is he was a fucking idiot for simply not cooperating with the guards and the prison rules. It's all well and good putting up a fight in the courts and with the local police, but once you're past that and you find yourself in prison, just fucking do as you're told. They can make life so much worse for you. My family attorney told me about one of his clients who was sentenced to 2 years for a federal CASC, non-violent. Someone gave him really bad advice about how to survive in federal prison. He followed the advice and found a big tough-looking guy on the very first day. He beat him up severely. The victim turned out to be a tough-looking guy who was actually a gentle giant who didn't fight back much, ended up with 2 broken legs and a fractured rib. My attorney's client got 4 extra years added to his 2-year sentence. That's what I call stupid. This was about 15 years ago. Not sure if the guy survived prison or not. Here's one from a good friend of mine, we'll call him T, who spent half his life inside. Picked a fight with the local inmates over something minor to establish dominance. The guy was European, and Europeans were kept separate from locals with good reason. There would be full-scale gang wars between the two sides now and again within the prison. None of his fellow Europeans backed him up. Hell, some of them even jumped in on kicking the ever-loving shit out of the newbie. Long but funny story, I worked for a PD. We arrested a local regular on an outstanding FTA warrant. The guy was always a pedo. The county jail was full, so we're contracted with an adjacent county jail nicknamed the Workhouse. It was old and nasty, and had a much tougher urban clientele. It took about 45 minutes to drive there, and, on the way, the prisoner was being chatty. He asked me to do him a favor when we got to the jail, which was, don't put me in with any of those GDN. We get to the jail, and sit the prisoner on the bench. There is a large black woman working the intake desk, and she and I process the paperwork. 15 minutes later I'm headed out the door when I stop and look at the prisoner on the bench. I turn to the woman and say, "Oh yeah, I forget. He has a request." The prisoner starts violently shaking his head no. The woman chuckles and says, "Oh yeah. What's that?" I repeat his request, that he doesn't want to be put in with any GDN. Her eyes get really big, and she smiles at me saying, "Yes sir. I'll take care of that." The prisoner looked like he was going to pass out. She immediately called for 2 guards who came from the back dragging logging chains. These were 2 black guys who looked like they were linebackers in the NFL. I smiled at the prisoner and walked to my cruiser. More stupid employee. A good friend, Steve, worked as a locksmith for a medium security prison, a really unpleasant job apparently. He bid on, and got the job as groundskeeper. He was the only actual prison employee, and his 4-man staff were trustee prisoners. The job was overseeing grounds using tractors, hand mowers, and lawn equipment. Some minor repairs were allowed, and the shop had tools for repairs. The groundskeeping hut was not on the actual prison grounds, but had its own unmonitored employee driveway and employee entrance. There was separate locked fence driveway that went directly into the prison. This was how the prisoners and equipment came and went. The trustees were only searched when they returned to the prison grounds, either on the mowers or when returning to their cells. Otherwise, the groundskeeping hut was not frequently inspected. It was a plum prisoner job. My friend bought an older Harley which ran but not well. One trustee was a made motorcycle gang member and my friend, and he bonded over motorcycles. One day Steve brought his motorcycle to work and showed it to the trustee. The trustee listened to the motor and said the bike needed bearings, which means an overhaul. A $4,000 job. As Steve could bring the crew in an hour or 2 before they were supposed to return to their cells, the trustee felt he could use that extra hour to overhaul the bike in a few weeks. And in the first days he totally disassembled the Harley's motor. Later that day, while returning to the prison, the trustee got caught smuggling in a small screwdriver, which meant this trustee crew would never return. Steve knew the groundskeeping hut would be inspected the next morning, and he got the motorcycle frame and wheels onto a pickup and taken out the shop. He didn't have time to get the motor parts, which he could claim were leftover lawnmower parts, but he knew that unmistakable motorcycle frame with wheels was his termination. The next day the inspectors glanced at the parts, made him take all the extra parts to a secure dumpster. He was reprimanded for not inventorying tools daily and having loose mower parts. The Harley was toast, but he actually kept his job.